So, the creator is here. I was very excited about this movie. I saw a trailer for it, I don't know, 4 or 5 months back, and I wanted to celebrate. Look, it's original IP. And then I saw who it was starring, John David Washington, and I cried a little bit on the inside. As mentioned in another video, I think every Nepo baby deserves a fifth chance to ruin a gigantic big budget movie. And John David Washington is most definitely one of my least favorite Nepo babies. And as a side note, Nepo babies, you only use that term when they're terrible. Nepo babies, there are great ones. There are amazing ones. Robert Downey Jr. is a Nepo baby. George Clooney is a Nepo baby. Jared Harris, like the master of the miniseries, is a Nepo baby. Do we call them that? No, we don't care because they're awesome. All that matters in the end of the day is your competence as an actor. And John David Washington, for me, he has not pulled through in the movies I've seen him in. Now, ironically enough, I'm not really going to talk about him too much here. I actually think he's okay in this. Though, to be honest, if you ask me, would I have rather seen Tom Cruise in this movie, 67-year-old Tom Cruise, the answer is yes. But let's start first and foremost with the fact that, yes, I was excited for this, and I'm very excited for the subject matter. I've always been a huge sci-fi fan, and here we have a movie coming out that's kind of dealing with where the future is headed. The dreaded word, AI, the word that's been on everybody's lips for the last 3 years, ever since ChatGPT came out, ever since we realized that, ironically enough, it was the software, not the hardware. It wasn't the robots. We're going to be replaced, and the creatives are going to be on the chopping block first. The dreaded robot takeover of all the manual jobs that everyone has feared and there's been movies about for so long is not what is happening, though in this movie, that is the history being displayed. As usual, it's not so much about the software, but about those darn humanoid robots. And you know, I want to take a minute here to talk about my personal view of the future, and this is supremely frustrating because when I was going to make this video like a week ago, I was going to talk about what I called the soft takeover. And this was a term that I myself invented and had not heard anybody talking about. I hadn't found it on Wikipedia. And then wouldn't you know it, I was listening to Jared or Joe Rogan or somebody in an interview the other day, and they were talking about literally this subject. And I said, God damn it, this was my idea. But this is where I think the future is headed for humanity. And that is a soft takeover. I think we are going to voluntarily cede control of society to AI. I think we are going to do it, and we're going to like it. And what do I mean by this? This was an idea that came to me when I read an article about Japanese AI CEOs. And so, I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago, there were articles coming out. Japanese companies were literally putting their company in charge with AI CEOs. And you know what? They didn't have to pay him $50 million a year. And you know what else? They were making good decisions. And just like everybody agrees that at some point, every car on the road is going to be automatically driven by AI. And in fact, one day it's inevitable. They're going to legislate manually driven cars off the road. I think, and I really believe that the future is one where we literally hand over the reins to an AI president. An AI president that is uncorruptible, that does what it says, and its prime directive is you are going to better the lives of the average citizen of whatever your country is. And yes, of course, there's it could be hacked, blah, blah, blah. But is that any better than any president we've had in the U.S. or any other country for that matter who can say whatever they want and then do whatever they want when they get in office? I mean, Christ, right now, 2 of the 3 most powerful countries are run by dictators. So I will take that any day of the week. And you know what? There are solutions for not getting hacked. It's called a USB cable. It's called an Ethernet cable. You unplug it. The system's offline and can't be touched. Beautiful. Print out the directives. You can make it work. So that is what I truly believe is the future of humanity. And that's what I call the soft takeover. Okay, now I've blabbed on about this long enough. Let's talk about the movie. Now, the creator is very bittersweet for me, because my true thoughts when it comes to this movie, it has some of the most incredible production design I've ever seen in my life. It is on the scale of Blade Runner. It is on the scale of The Fifth Element. The movie is a fully realized universe with so many layers, and I mean, just the production and art design is unbelievable. Just the schematics, the layouts of these ships, of these robots, of this architecture, every scene is, I can't even imagine what the budget of this movie was, but it just looks phenomenal. And my biggest regret when it comes to this movie is while I feel that this is probably one of the greatest play stages I've ever seen constructed, the play itself is relatively mediocre. And the problem comes in with kind of everything outside of the visuals. Ultimately, the film feels rushed. The performances are not unbelievable. The writing is not particularly good. And I feel like this could have been so much better, so much fuller as like a 6-episode miniseries, something the length of The Queen's Gambit, where you really had the space to breathe and absorb this stuff. And unfortunately, the movie rushes along at such a breakneck pace, and I won't even say it's the whole movie. I would say somewhere around the midpoint, and especially towards the end, I felt like they were slamming 10,000 ideas at once on the screen, and you just didn't have time to take it in. And it feels so wasteful because there are scenes in this movie, just off the top of my head, there's a scene somewhere in Asia, as where most of this movie is set, in a robot factory. And you get literally 10 seconds looking around this factory, seeing robots be repaired and constructed, and it's fascinating and it's interesting, and bam, you're off to the next scene immediately. And I can't even imagine how much work was put in just setting up this 10-second shot, and I wish we had a little more time to appreciate what was going on. Another thought I have when it comes to that is recently I've seen a lot of series, especially I think Amazon Prime is a prime suspect in this, where they take a concept or a short story or a book and it's spread out like, too little butter over too much toast. It just drags on. I never did make a video about The Silo. For God's sakes, avoid that like the plague. And it's too bad because I think a post-apocalyptic mystery box show is probably my favorite thing in the world. But they have maybe 3 episodes of content there spread out over 9, and it's just a slog. It's your fingernails being pried from your fingers. It's horrible. Here we have the opposite problem, and sometimes I wonder, I look at modern movies and TV shows, and I wonder if I've been spoiled, because, when I think back to movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, there was a lot happening. It was a brisk pace. It was full of content and entertainment. But when it comes to this movie, it's just too much. It's too much, too fast, and it's a bummer because there's so much potential here. So here's our setting. The movie opens with this very peppy, very trendy little montage with the 1950s music, da 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 da, robots have improved our life.
Who? Me?
Yes, you.
Okay, Toots.
And you see little vignettes of how robots have integrated with society. They're going to help you do your taxes. They're going to take your kid to school. They are the greatest thing ever. Now, I should do as a side note here before I launch into a full plot synopsis. I've always been fundamentally disturbed by robot scenes in movies where they are killed en masse. There is a scene in the animated Matrix movie, which is excellent, by the way, just the first one, where they're literally murdering robots who are saying, please, God, stop, don't kill us, I'm real. What is it, AI, right? Steven Spielberg, where they have a circus where they dismantle and pour acid over robots that look like humans screaming. And they do a little bit of that in this movie. Now, my issue here is I really feel, yes, there would be some horrific, disturbing group of people who would want to do this, but at the same time, I just don't see society doing it. And the reason why I say that is already you've got people crying about ChatGPT saying this is the first time they've had a friend. I think if you pair AI that's indistinguishable from an actual human and put a human body around it, I think it's over. I think it's over for society, quite frankly. I don't see how man and women are ever going to get together and make babies again once that situation arises. So I hope it is not the future with this mass destruction of robots, and I don't think it's going to be were we to ever reach this point. But back to the movie. So everything's wonderful. There's a nice little montage, and then all of a sudden, bam, nuke drop. Nice little cut in. And robots are responsible for nuking LA. And now the world is at a point where the West... Oh, that reminds me once again, if you are patriotic in any sense, do not watch this movie because, my God, America is not played off as the good guys. In fact, there doesn't seem to be a single shred of grayness to this movie. Essentially, Americans are evil, the rest of the world is good. So, now we wake up. We're in the future. America's at war with the robots. Asia has kept robots going. Quite frankly, I think Asia would have won this war in a second because robots are very, very useful, and America without robots, I don't know about that. But America has a solution. They've constructed a gigantic monstrosity that seems to just float around and blow things up, and nobody has missiles or seems to be able to stop it in any way. It's called Nomad, the dreaded Nomad. And we're in a situation where I guess America has essentially won the war. Asia's on its last legs, and this floating fortress just kind of goes willy-willy. Nobody can stop it and just drops bombs wherever it wants, which isn't very nice. But I can only assume at that point they've won the war, and the war is kind of a guerrilla war at this point. So we have John David Washington. He's opposite Gemma Chan. They're laying in bed. They're clearly in love. It's a nice, beautiful little scene. They're on the beach taking it easy, and bam, the attack is coming. Speaking of Gemma Chan, that reminds me, if you really want to see a great What Do Humans Do in the Face of Human Robots, go watch Humans, which was a show on the BBC with like a 24-year-old Gemma Chan. Oh, she's so gorgeous. Playing the most sexy, beautiful robot on Earth, and she gets taken into a relatively kind of whatever middle-class household, and the husband starts really struggling with his so-so wife versus Gemma Chan. What a great show until the ending. You'll understand if you watch it. The ending is an absolute disaster. But the bad writing is already afoot, because while the opening scene is quite beautiful, we learn very quickly that John David Washington is a double agent. He is infiltrating the robot terrorist network, has fallen in love, has gotten Gemma Chan pregnant, and the attack comes. And he tells her, he says, come on, let's go. She finds out that he's one of the bad ones. She hears him over the phone that he's a double agent. She can't believe it. And he's saying, no. These robots aren't real. We're real. This baby is real. Come with me. But she reveals later on that she was literally raised by robots. I just don't understand how this guy worked his way in. I don't know how their dates went when she asked him, what do you think about robots? And he's like, they're okay. And she says, well, I was literally raised by robots and I love them. And he's like, whatever. I just don't know how he expects her to buy that line, finding out her history. But let's continue on. Nomad blows everything up. It looks like Gemma Chan is dead. He passes out. Maybe he's dead. Bam, flash forward 5 years later, he wakes up. He's working as kind of a garbage man in LA. He's an ex-soldier, and he spends his day cleaning up ancient robot corpses, and the few that are still alive, he instantly unplugs. And his co-workers are sad because they reflect a little of that human emotion. It seemed like a living being we just killed. And he goes, no, it's a robot. Doesn't have any feelings. He's channeling Will Smith from iRobot. And so far, the movie's been pretty good, but now the plot has to happen. So the plot is he's approached by his ex-military colleagues, some powerful generals, and they say, guess what? We want you because you have intimate knowledge of this facility to help us break in and destroy the ultimate terrorist weapon. If we do this, we're going to win the war. If we don't do this, we're going to lose. And just so you know, here's a recording of your dead wife. She's still alive. So now he has serious motivation. There's also a terrible speech given by Allison Janney, who is bizarrely miscast in this movie, where she talks about how the Neanderthals ate humans, which is, the humans ate the Neanderthals. That's what humans do whenever there's a threat. And it's essentially exactly like Anthony Hopkins' speech from Westworld, just 10 times worse. It's like, her impersonating him, except she's a gnat.
The only problem was there was a species that was smarter and meaner than them. Us. And we raped and murdered them out of existence.
Do you know what happened to the Neanderthals, Bernard? We ate them.
And so we're off to the races. We're off to infiltrate this robotic installation. And you know, it's interesting when I think about this because, once again, the movie has very mixed messages as to the situation in the world because this is apparently the most important mission for humanity, but the installation's being invaded by like 20 guys. I don't know, maybe you should send like 1,000 guys covertly in there. At the same time, as I've mentioned before, Nomad seems to just be running willy-nilly and blowing anything up it wants. So what stage are we in the war? Is it a guerrilla war? Are we, what are we doing here? But that doesn't matter. And more importantly, also, tonally, this reminds me of the movie really struggles to decide, is it a drama, is it a sci-fi, and then tries to really awkwardly insert comedy. A perfect example, when you have the evil American soldiers, they're like laughing and telling jokes while they're shooting these defenseless scientists in the facility, and yet it really makes it clear that it wants you to think that this is funny. Like, they have a universal translator where one of the scientists basically tells them to go fuck themselves, but it comes out like, go make love to your mother. And I swear to God, I think the movie wanted the audience to laugh, but I wasn't laughing. Like, this is horrifying.
Please make love to yourself and also make love to your mother.
Though it does remind me of this strange place we are in modern movies where, of course, everything must be politically correct, and yet mindless, endless violence and death is totally acceptable. But who knows how we reach this stage? And so, of course, as seen in the trailers, he discovers that the super weapon is, in fact, a little girl. And wouldn't you know it, the rest of the team dies, and now he's together with the girl, faced with a choice. What do I do? Am I turning this over to the government? Am I using the girl to try to find my wife? And yes, believe me, it's the second one. In fact, this entire movie, his 100% goal is to find his wife. He loves his wife. He is the worst traitor in the American army. They made such a poor choice signing this guy onto the mission because he does not care about countries. He cares about finding his wife, and he's going to do anything he can to find her. And so they set off on an adventure together, and it is, as stated before, a beautiful adventure, an unbelievably beautiful adventure, but it reminds me once again of a specific sequence where you have both the best and the worst of the movie. Going back to the robot factory, I'm reminded that just for a second, we see this unbelievably cool-looking, futuristic flying cop car, and it's like, my God, it's as genius as the shuttle design in Star Wars. It looks so good. But then we flash back to the scene at hand, and he's finding one of his old friends. And it's these kind of contrivances which just destroy the movie for me. His old friend takes basically like a magnifying glass out and looks at the little girl for like 10 seconds. And then he turns to our main character and goes, "This is the most advanced robot I've ever seen. She's going to grow powerful. Soon she's going to grow and grow, and one day she'll be so powerful she could take over the world." And it's like, bro, you looked at her for 5 seconds with a magnifying glass. I mean, at least you could have plugged her into a computer and ran some diagnostic tests or something. It would not take that much work to establish this line of dialogue, but they just blow through it, and it's like they don't have time for anything. Once again, reminds me of how the ending of this movie is destroyed by this furious pace. We have a scene where she has been captured by the U.S. military, and bizarrely the general brings John David Washington in, the worst idea that anyone could possibly have, and in half a line of dialogue just brushes off and sets up this ridiculous sequence where he says literally, I'll just put the clip in.
Tried to terminate the weapon cleanly, but she won't let us. She trusts you.
Right? So we've captured her and we can't kill her cleanly. What does that mean? Throw a grenade into the room. It's just like, the one sad thing with Star Wars, where they send out the probe and the guys go, "Oh, don't shoot, it's empty." That doesn't make any sense. Just say something like, "We're under orders to conserve our energy in case of a rebel counterattack." Like, you just put a little bit of thought into these lines, you're not going to get sucked out of the movie with these ridiculous contrivances, And speaking of the ending, what a rushed miasma of disaster. It perfect example, right? There's a specific sequence where they've entered Nomad. Now, don't even get me started on how the whole movie has been leading to this point, and they just basically fly up there, okay? It takes 5 seconds. It's rushed. The most powerful, the most defensive construction that mankind has ever made, and they fly up there in a jet. It's like no one bothers to shoot them down. And then they go into the facility, and everybody runs away. It's, oh my God, it's a 6-year-old girl and one random dude. Evacuate the most expensive technological design in human history. Everybody get out and run. And so there's a sequence where they're trying to destroy it, and he's on this giant conveyor belt that runs across the fortress that's full of the missiles that it launches that destroys everything. And this is fascinating. It's a fascinating design. As mentioned, everything here is fascinating. You know, you get the sequence with the gigantic tanks, the architecture, everything looks so damn good. But he's on this conveyor belt, and it would be such a remarkable sequence, the tension here, while she's desperately trying to hack into the system and stop it. He's on the conveyor belt, which is about to launch the missile. He's about to die, and you could just sit in this sequence and really absorb the fear and the awesomeness of this. And they spend like 10 seconds on it. They're basically superheroes. He's on the conveyor belt for 10 seconds. He jumps off. Everybody's immortal all of a sudden. And it's just scene to scene to scene with no room to breathe. Once again, reminds me, in the final showdown, they're essentially confronted by this giant spider demon drone. It's very Ghost in the Shell. It's very Blame, if you've ever read that manga, one of the greatest mangas of all time. And this sequence by itself could be a 5-minute sequence full of terror, full of, oh my God, what is this thing? And once again, it's this incredible design that's just blown through. It's like a 1-minute scene. Why not spend some time here? But they can't. They don't. The movie itself is already, 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'm surprised it's not 3 hours, considering the length of most modern movies. But we just don't have time for anything to breathe, and it's a goddamn shame because there's so much potential here. Now, speaking of the cast, there's not all that much to talk about because, once again, the star of this movie is the set design. I mean, the characters are almost bit players as they go to place, and that's the real tragedy. John David Washington, as mentioned earlier, puts in a decent effort. He's really not as bad. He's not as, maybe he's been taking some acting classes. He's not as flat-faced and charismaless as everything else I've seen him in. But at the same time, there's nothing that's particularly outstanding or blows me away. And on top of this, his character, really, he just won't go away. I almost groaned at one point during the theater. Everyone is constantly shooting at him and trying to kill him. And at the end of every scene, he just keeps on coming back. And he goes to the little girl. He says, come on, let's go find my wife. Everyone's dead. Let's go on to the next sequence, which reminds me very much, the director is the same guy who directed Rogue One, and I feel that trait here. I wish this guy would stop making movies because it's the same formula. It just feels so scene to scene. We're going here, we're going there, we're going there, we're going to make a speech now, we're going there, and it doesn't feel like a cohesive tapestry that a beautiful movie would make. Of course, we have the lovely Gemma Chan. She's not in the movie as much as I would like, to be honest. She's one of the better actresses in Hollywood right now, and of course, she's undeniably gorgeous, but she does her part. We've got Madeline Yuna Voles as the secret weapon, and they do give her a name, which I can't remember now. She's okay. She's a child actor, like all child actors. I have serious doubts. I think she's probably going to spend the rest of her life talking about how she was in this movie once, but who knows? Maybe she'll make it. And kind of last but not least, you have Allison Janney, who is a really interesting choice. I think she does, while as mentioned earlier, she totally flops this little Neanderthal monologue. She does present a really interesting choice as a casting for the dangerous, the one-minded directional military general. And in general, I like Allison Janney. I think she's a good actress. Ken Watanabe makes his usual appearance with his difficult-to-understand accent. He puts a little heart into the movie, but nothing really worth mentioning there. And really, last but not least, you have Ralph Ineson, who kind of got his start in The Witch, with that amazingly deep, gravelly voice. You can barely understand what he's saying, but he's a good one, man. I like him in pretty much everything I see him in. He actually reminds me he had a bit part in Chernobyl. Now you can't turn your head without seeing him. He was just doing voice work in Diablo 4, followed by Final Fantasy 16, and seems like every modern movie now, somebody says, "Get me Ralph Innocent." So he doesn't take away all that much. So what are the overall themes and messages here? Well, I think at the end of the day, they're trying to tell you that Americans are bad, robots are good, and love conquers all. Or really, it just drives guys to be insanely relentless, even though there really is no hope in the end. Kind of like me and my wife. And overall, and it's already been stated 100 times, this movie it's unbalanced. It just doesn't work. Too much, too fast. And it's a goddamn shame because, my God, whoever designed this movie, the production designer, and I looked him up and I actually wasn't that impressed with anything else he's did, but somebody here had a dream and they made a world, and that world was beautiful. But then they filled that world with just kind of an average, mediocre movie. But at least you get one side of that coin. In general, most movies these days just seem to be, everything's bad. Everything's safe. Nobody wants to offend anybody. Nobody's trying to make art anymore. So at least you get that part of it. And for me, that makes this movie memorable. I think it is worth your time to see. Just turn the sound off, I think that's the key. Turn the sound of the dialogue off, take some LSD, and just watch the visuals, and it's going to be a great time. Play some Philip Glass in the background. Anyway, thanks for joining me. If you had fun listening to me ramble, consider subscribing so I can make more of these in my free time, and I'll see you guys later.